Okay, and we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to the Revo Report. Today, we're joined with Ryan Pauly, who is the founder and president of Think Well, the director of immersive experiences at Maven, and an adjunct professor of Christian apologetics at Biola. He's a passionate Christian apologist whose ministry equips believers to defend their faith with both intellectual rigor and Christ-like compassion. Ryan has dedicated himself to helping Christians navigate difficult questions while effectively engaging with skeptics in today's challenging cultural landscape. Through his teaching, speaking, and digital outreach, he has become a trusted voice in helping believers understand not just what they believe, but why those beliefs stand firm against scrutiny. So, without further ado, let's welcome in our dear brother in Christ and friend, Ryan. This episode is brought to you by our Revo Report Patreon. Join our community to get first access to interviews, Bible study guides, devotionals, and prayer books for adults, youth, families, and marriages. Plus, resources on Christian living, leadership, sermon prep, exclusive Q&As, online Bible studies, and even one-on-one coaching or counseling. Visit patreon.com/Vince Revo and grow in faith and truth with us.
Vince, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Me too. Sorry, I was about to call you Paul there for a second.
I'm
So,
used to it. It brings me back to my high school baseball days where my name was Pauly back then. Everyone just called me Pauly.
oh, is that right?
Yeah, you go by your last names on most teams, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, in sports, I played softball as well, but we all addressed each other by our first names, unless there was someone. So I think we had like two Johns, and then we called him by his last
Yeah,
name.
yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
well, to get right into it, I'm really curious about your journey into apologetics. From doubt to defender, from doubter to defender. So a lot of apologists begin their journey with their own questions.
Yeah.
What was pivotal? What was a pivotal moment for you that led you to really dedicate your life, first of all, to Jesus Christ, and then to defending Jesus Christ?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I, like many Christians, have the story of growing up and being born and raised in a Christian home. My parents planted a church when I was young. And so, I mean, we were just heavily involved in all aspects of church and going to Christian school. And so, this is just what I was taught from a very young age. And so, I just kind of accepted it and I believed it and was baptized at about 12 years old. And I remember just being committed to this thing, but never really doubting or questioning or things of that nature. When I got to college, this is the first time that I stepped away from a kind of the Christian bubble, and I played junior college baseball about 4 hours away from home, where I was surrounded by mostly non-Christians. And I think this was kind of a pivotal moment in my faith where I finally realized or had to make that choice of, do I follow this for myself? And so I found a local church and I found a pastor there who actually became a mentor of mine and still is. And I would go over to his house and they would cook me dinner. And it was wonderful as, a broke college student getting a home cooked meal. That was amazing. I would do my laundry at his house, that sort of thing. And so I continued to make this a serious thing in my life and stay committed to pursuing Christ and what I was doing. However, it wasn't until my junior year of college, I transferred to Vanguard University. I start studying theology, specifically focusing in on youth leadership. And it was at this moment I'm sitting in my theology classes, Vince, and I'm like, I don't know this stuff. Like I grew up in the church. I know the simple Bible stories. I know kind of general ideas, but I don't know themes of book. I don't know why Paul wrote books. I don't know the big story of scripture. I don't know deeper theological issues of why Jesus had to die and why death and why blood sacrifice. Why couldn't he just say, I forgive you? Or how do you explain the Trinity and these core fundamental Christian doctrines of salvation and the nature of God? And I quickly realized, like, man, I don't know this. It either wasn't taught or it was taught and I was just focused on sports and having fun with my friends and I wasn't paying attention. And so this was a moment in my life where I was like, I deeply want to know this and I want to understand it and I want to be able to explain it to students. It
Mm.
was then after graduating college that I actually found myself going off into the mission field. I spent 4 years as a missionary in the Dominican Republic. And it was during this time I really started working with students post graduation and seeing students really kind of apathetic in the faith, not caring about the faith, and then reading all the reports, at least of American students walking away from the church. And it was at this time that I remember asking the question of like, man, I think, why are these students walking away? And I think it's because they don't actually, like me, know why they believe what they believe. There is not a deeper foundation. But I had no idea that apologetics even existed. And so it was at this time that my brother in the Air Force started getting some challenges from his Air Force friends. He contacted his high school Bible teacher, who told him, "You need to watch William Lane Craig." And so then my brother started watching his debates and sent them to me and said, "Man, you got to watch this guy." I started watching Craig, his debates, and I saw he was a research professor at Talbot School of Theology. So I looked that up, and I very quickly found myself applying for the Biola certificate in Christian apologetics, which then went into my master's of apologetics. And now I just got hired as a professor of apologetics at Biola. And so for me, the story is not one of my own doubt. I never really struggled with the faith intellectually. I never was really had a serious time of struggle myself. But it was for me working with students and seeing the doubts they had, seeing them walk away from the faith, and really wanting to say, how do we build a foundation in students that leads them to transition well through life with Christ as a foundation as they follow Christ passionately in all different areas from high school to college to the adult life? And so that's kind of my journey a little bit, and that led me to where I am today, where now I started a blog and a podcast and a whole bunch of different stuff that I do today.
That's awesome, man. Like I said backstage, we were talking how I went through a very similar journey to yours. What advice would you give to someone you worked with? I'm sure a lot of people who have been doubting their faith. What would you say to someone who's experiencing doubt in their faith journey today? Maybe hasn't expressed it or have expressed it to a pastor or a mentor or someone who's
Yeah,
been discipling them, but they just haven't felt like that was not a sufficient answer. What would you say
yeah.
to someone who's really kind of maybe even on the fence there?
I think that's a great question. I think the first thing is they need to recognize themselves that doubt is not always wrong. Doubt is not always sin. To have doubts and to have questions is biblical. You can look at a survey of individuals in Scripture who doubted. John
Right.
the Baptist, right, doubted as he was in prison. Is Jesus real? I mean, he baptized Jesus, saw the Spirit descend in the form of the dove, the heavens speak from Father, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. And yet when he's in prison, he doubts, is he real? And sends his
Mm,
disciples to Jesus to ask if he really is the Messiah. And so we see examples like this throughout Scripture. And so I think the first thing is to recognize that it's not always sin. The second thing is to voice it, express it. I was speaking at one summer camp where a pastor came up to me afterwards and goes, "Wow, I've been struggling so deeply with doubts that has made me question whether what I'm actually preaching is true or not. And I've dealt with this for years." And so
wow.
he is up there preaching what he's saying what he knows he should say, but he's not even sure if it's even true. But he hadn't expressed
Mm,
this to people. And so, or I guess he said he had made it known, but not really investigated it. And so maybe that's the second thing is make it known, but then dig in. And I think
mm,
it's maybe helpful to categorize that there's different types of doubts. There's intellectual doubts where you doubt the truth of Christianity, and these are objections that come up against the faith that cause those sort of doubts. There are emotional doubts where you experience something wrong within the church. Maybe it's church hurt or something of that nature, where you question the goodness of God and the truth of Christianity based on your emotional experiences. There's also volitional doubt that you just simply don't want to believe. And again, this is not everyone. I feel like I always have to clarify. Not everyone is like this, but I had specifically two students, one specifically, who told me, if I become a Christian, I will
mm,
have to stop doing the things I want to do. So he didn't even want to consider the truth of Christianity because he was living a life that he didn't want to have to give up. And so again, that's not everybody, but that's some. And so often it's helpful to classify doubts. I received a message from a student the other day who just said, "I'm struggling so deeply with doubt and questioning whether this is really true and whether heaven is real." And so I said, okay, let's pause for a second. Are there intellectual objections that you have received against the truth of Christianity that you think are persuasive and you're struggling to make sense of? Or is it just kind of this like, well, it seems too good to be true sort of thing?
mm,
And he goes, it's more of the seeming too good to be true. Right. And so that's where it's helpful to kind of like categorize. And the last thing here in this, I would just say is with another individual who was struggling with doubt, it was because he had seen a lot of Christian leaders and musicians and people deconstructing the faith. And so I said, okay, what about their deconstruction? What about their leaving the faith is causing you to question that Christianity is true?
mhm,
Are they presenting intellectual arguments that have proven Christianity wrong in their mind that you should also consider? Or is it just the fact like, man, here's a Christian that was living the Christian life and now they're walking away, but there's nothing necessarily inherent in that of showing that Christianity is true. And so that's why I would just encourage individuals to kind of write their doubts out, to categorize them, to see where they fit. And then there's different solutions to each type of category of doubt. Ultimately, also recognizing that that the question is, well, what if this issue never gets resolved? Does that mean that Christianity is false, that Jesus didn't rise from the dead? So I'd say, if your doubts are intellectual, pursue answers. Find intellectual individuals who have answered these questions and see if you can find satisfactory answers. If your doubts are emotional, then you need to go to people in the church for accountability, for help, for counseling, to discuss these hurts that you've experienced and find healing within the church. If your doubts are volitional, well, now there becomes a need to maybe repent from sin. If it's a sinful life that is keeping you from believing in the truth of Christianity, that there's a recognition of, I need to repent and turn to Christ, and allow him to better lead me as a follower of Jesus. And so hopefully that kind of makes sense, and making sense of where these doubts fall, have then a different solution, and also a different weight to what the doubt is.
Mm. Yeah, that's good, because I think sometimes we categorize doubt in just this, one overarching thing, when
Right.
really you've broken it down into what type of doubt is it. So that's really good. I was just watching a video on Lecrae. Also, he was talking about how he was performing, but then was having these doubts. Didn't even believe in what he was performing, right? But still,
Yeah.
with like dealing with those, and being able to open it up to someone. Finding out, okay, what type of doubt is this, and then who should I talk to about this? Because some could be for counseling. Maybe one, you go read an apologetics book. Another one, you have to really go to God and repent. So
Yeah.
so that's really good advice. I want you to, as I ask this question, I want you to kind of just share the first thing that pops into your mind. Okay, like don't
Okay.
try and filter it out. Just share it, and also how God has dealt with that in your life. So I'm going to ask
Okay.
this question, and then yeah, I really want to know, just off the top of your mind, what comes up.
Yeah, and I don't know what Vince is about to ask.
Yeah, he really doesn't.
There's no prep here.
Okay, here it is. What do you most fear in life, and why? And how has God helped you confront that fear?
In the last couple weeks, we have experienced some significant deaths. Um, Close friend of mine, a classmate of mine in graduate school, um,
Mm.
next door neighbor who I share a wall with. Her daughter was
Wow.
pregnant, and her daughter passed away, giving birth to the child. And then a couple weeks later, the
Oh,
child
wow.
passed away. And what I found in these experiences, um, is and my coworker, my boss's dad just passed away last week. And I think what hit me the hardest when thinking about this is them not being able to spend time with their kids and their grandkids, especially my
Yeah.
classmate who had grandkids, who were three of which were born in the last couple of years. Every time I saw pictures with him and his kids, it crushed me, and I broke down crying. And I think that is probably the first thing that comes to mind, is this fear of not being able to spend time with those that we love. To feel like
Mhm.
we're missing out on memories, to feel like, man,
Wow.
I want my parents to see my boys grow up, and I hope that they can, because I see the beauty of seeing children grow up, and I want to see my boys grow up. And so I think that's probably what comes to mind, is maybe that fear because of
Mm.
recent situations of
Yeah.
one, two, three, four different deaths in the last couple
Wow.
weeks. Um, Christ has brought healing to that. Number one is that we recognize that we do not mourn as the world does, because of the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, the truth of the
Yeah.
resurrection of Jesus Christ, what we're going to celebrate on Easter Sunday here coming up in a week.
Yeah.
And to know that death has lost its sting, that there is hope and victory found in Jesus. I think there's such beauty in that. The other thing I think is that when I was doing my theology of
Amen.
the body research for my doctoral studies,
Mm.
I forget what author it was, but one author was talking about how we often see our best days were behind us. Back when I was 30 and I was in good shape and I was in college, and those were my days, but now it's all downhill from here. And he said, no, from a Christian view, your best days are always in front of you, no matter
Wow.
where you are. And I remember my grandma saying, well, that's good news for us. I said, but grandma, that's good news for everybody. And he goes, but look, he goes, this author writes, I don't have to feel like I have to travel every place in the world and experience all the things that there is to experience, or else I'm missing out, because I will experience far better and greater things for all of eternity in heaven. And so there is no missing out if I don't get that one thing I needed to get. And I think about that too, of, when we have a hope that is found in Christ, I am fearful of maybe I'm going to miss out on experiences with my boys, but we know that this life is just a blip in the eternal life that we have with Christ, and that He is preparing us for an eternal glory, and to one which we will have an infinite number of experiences with our loved ones, and in the presence of God. And so I think that is the hope that we have in the midst of pain and suffering and death that we experience here in this life.
Wow. Whoa. That reminds me of how different it is to have the perspective of a follower of Jesus Christ, where the world is telling us, well, if nothing wrong happens, then you will have peace. But with us walking with the Prince of Peace, it's despite even death happening, we can have peace.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a beautiful lesson. In what ways do you think that fear can actually strengthen a follower of Jesus Christ's relationship with God and their own personal inner strength?
Well, I think this relates to the question of doubt, where the question is, what do you do with your doubts? What do you do with your fears? Do you hide? Do you tremble? Do you run away? Does your doubting cause you to run from God, or do those fears, do those doubts cause you to run to God? Does it cause you to deepen your faith, where you place your fears and your worries and your needs on Jesus, who says, "I can bear them," and who has come to bear them? And so, again, I think about my children, man. There's no greater picture, or no greater way to understand God as Father and us as His children, I think, than when you have your own kids. I got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and my goodness, when they are scared and they come running to me, that is like the most heartwarming, loving thing, to where I say, "I got you. I got you. I
Mm.
got you." But when they are scared and crying and I'm saying, "Come here, come here," and they're like, "No, no, no," and they want to stay away, then they're just staying in that fear themselves, and there's no comfort, there's no healing, there's none of that going on, to where when they come to me and I hug them, it's amazing how quickly that fear goes away, or that pain all of a
Mm.
sudden doesn't hurt as much as you think it does. And so I think that's, I don't know, I see that picture in my boys, and I know that to be true of doubts and true of fear, is that we cast our fears upon the Lord, and say, "God, I don't know what's going on, but I trust you, because you are good. You love me. You got me. You uphold and sustain the entire universe." I think there's so much, and this is where theology, I think, deepens our not only our understanding of God, but our
Mhm.
approach to life, is that when we understand who God is as the creator, the sustainer of the universe, the owner
Yeah.
of everything, Colossians 1, John 1, Genesis 1, you look at, 1 Corinthians, I think, 6, where it talks about He has bought you with a price. So honor God with your body, like you belong to Him. You are created by Him, and He loves you more than we can imagine. And so when we understand Him as that creator and us as created, it puts, I think, our fears and our issues and our problems into perspective of what is God doing in this, and how is He actually upholding us in that. And again, I think we know, as Romans talks about, the suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, character produces hope, and this hope does not disappoint us. Paul talks about, for this light and momentary affliction is producing an eternal weight of glory, as we look to not to the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen
Mhm.
are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And so the question is, when you
Mm.
go through suffering, we know
Yeah.
that we often come out, when we persevere, we come out better, and we learn and we grow through that. And we know that God is preparing us, and He's using this world to prepare us for this eternal glory. And so that's the question: is when we doubt, when we fear, do we look to what is seen and see everything falling apart and cause even more fear? Or do we look to what is unseen, to the eternal things, to the God and creator and sustainer of the universe that loves us, and go, "God, I don't understand, I don't know, but I trust you"? And again, that's easy to say. It's really
Yeah.
hard to
Yeah.
do when you're in the midst of fear and anxiety and issues. But
Mhm.
that's where we have to say, number one, how do I go back to Scripture and understand who God is, and hopefully allow that to form a foundation, to where when things are bad, they're hopefully not as bad as they could be. And then also surrounding ourselves in Christian community. And that's the point, and one of the points and purposes of the church, is to surround ourselves with fellow believers to uphold us and lift us up when we are down, and to help us to live that right life when we can't do it on our own strength. So there's such hope in the Christian
Mm.
story and the understanding of who God is.
Yeah. Wow. I had a moment like that this morning where the secretary was sending me messages, right, about things that need to be done. Of course, it's Holy Week, so it's extremely busy at the church, And I found myself, like, as soon as I got up, instead of just stopping to pray and acknowledge that, hey, God's got all this, I went into like, okay, how do I fix this? How do I fix this? And you're right. We need to sometimes just stop and pause when you're overwhelmed, when you're afraid, when you're doubting, to go, okay, who am I looking to? Am I going to look to Jesus in this moment? Am I going to look to the one who holds my faith, to the author and finisher of my faith? Or am I
Yeah.
going to try and fix this on my own? Am I going to try and deal with this fear on my own, deal with this doubt on my own? I acknowledge that Abba Father is there. I love what you said there, and it is so true. It's such a real, tangible illustration of who God is. Just run to Him. Run to Him. Are you finding though that younger people in this generation, the ones that you've been dealing with, high school, college, instead of running to God, though, do you find them running to other things, running to Gary Vee, running to Joe Rogan, running to success and all these other and all these other things, and thinking that there is this, almost the world is creating almost this false dichotomy between, like, science and God, for example. Are you finding that they are running from God versus running to God?
I don't know, I know that's common, but
Mm.
I have seen in the last just couple weeks a few different reports coming out that showing an upward tick in Gen Z in following Jesus or under wanting to know Jesus or kind of being more open to understanding and knowing Jesus. And to me, this is also, I think, kind of confirmed. And again, I know the algorithm sends us what we want to see, but when I jump on apps like TikTok, every other thing that pops up is either some Christian TikToker are discussing what he believes or inviting callers, or it's an atheist TikToker trying to prove that God does not exist and that Christianity is not real and that God is evil. And my algorithm, my feed is just filled with these. And so I think the other thing we recognize is that our technological generation is making it a lot easier for people to share their ideas online. And there's almost been this reignition of conversations about Jesus. And so when people are running to social media, they're seeing these videos. And that was one of the questions I got on doubt, was that some student was on TikTok and all of a sudden TikTok recommended my videos to him. And then he messaged me saying, I'm struggling with doubt in my faith. Can I chat with you and have, get some advice? And so, I find that, there's always going to be the people that run to other things, but there does seem to be a new trend of people seeking Jesus, or at least being open to Jesus, which is really encouraging. And that's where I want to try to stress to parents and pastors and people out there, is that we can look at the technology of our culture and go, how horrible all these atheists and people are outside online and trying to prove Christianity is wrong. There's so many false ideas, and these platforms are filled with so much bad ideas. And that's true. But there's also an incredible opportunity we have here to engage where people are, to where I can go live on TikTok. And the other day I went live for like an hour on TikTok, and I got 1,000 people that joined the conversation.
Wow.
Like, that's crazy. And I don't go live on TikTok very much. It's not like I built this huge platform on TikTok. And so that's where I think there's I find hope in the fact that, yes,
Mm.
people always try to find other answers, but there does seem to be this kind of renewed interest in Jesus and what he can actually do for us.
Yeah, and I'm glad people like you are going on these mediums now, because they can be used for the glory of God. I think there was a period where a lot of Christians, even from the pulpit, were being taught, okay, so stay away from social media; it's evil. Protect your eyes, etc. But we also need to get our voices heard there and defend the gospel, proclaim the gospel. And so I do find hope as well, seeing people like you who are embracing these mediums and using them for the glory of God, because otherwise they'll be the devil will use them otherwise, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's clearly, it's like, technology is not neutral. It's not neutral, and so and that's where students are, whether we like it or not. Students are there, and so if Christians are not providing positive, good, true ideas on those social media platforms, or responding to objections that the atheists and critics and skeptics are making, then all they're going to get is one side of the story. And so then we should not necessarily be surprised when they only hear one side of the equation that's not friendly to Christianity or historic Christianity, and then start to believe that narrative when they're never hearing a counter argument or example or even some other aspect of the picture. And so that's where I think we need to recognize, yeah, it's not neutral. It can be used wrongly in a lot of ways, but it can also be used well.
Hmm. And what do you think the church can do to engage these young thinkers? Because there's a lot. I've heard stories of people going around, church to church to church, like missionaries from the Philippines, for example. Some friends of ours, and they'll say that for a lot of churches, the population is just getting older and older and older, and sometimes the young ones aren't filling in the pews, right? It's great to see recent research talk about how there's more, Gen Z coming back to church and such. But what do you
Yeah.
think the church is maybe missing now that it could do to really engage that younger generation more and more?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's every church is different, right? So there may be churches doing it well and others that maybe are lacking. But I think the general thing that I have found is number one of showing that there's an intellectual, thoughtful side of Christianity that we actually care about questions. It is not this completely blind, close your eyes and just believe faith that is going to be pitted against everything that these students learn in school, and that there's actually this deep intellectual tradition within Christianity. I think students often don't know that that's out there. I think the
Mm,
aspect to that then is to show like we're interested in your questions. We want to discuss the
mm,
things that you see online. We're not afraid of that. And so that when they hear something on social media, they actually feel like there's an openness and a willingness of their leadership to hear that question and say, hey, I was watching TikTok and I saw a video that argued this. What do you think
mm,
about that? And if they know the answer, great. If they don't, that person, that pastor will actually is interested in studying that out and investigating that with the student. Um, Jay Warner Wallace and Sean McDowell talk about this idea of what we need to give two whys for every what. I
mm,
find a lot of students know what they're supposed to believe, but they don't actually know why, and they don't know why it matters. Those are the two whys.
mm,
Why do we believe it, and why does it matter? And so I get a lot. Hey, I know that. You know, I know
mm,
that it's wrong to have sex before I'm married, but I don't know why or why it matters. Or I know that I'm supposed to stand up for this, but I don't know why or why it matters. And so I think that's where kind of I was too as a student of I knew the what's, I knew the stories, but I didn't know why. I didn't know the deeper understanding. And so the question is, when a student knows that Jesus died on the cross, but they don't know why that's true or why it even matters that Jesus died, or they know that, Jesus is the only way to salvation, but not why or why it matters.
mm,
And then all of a sudden they're getting these challenges against the faith. Are they going to stand up strong for what they believe when they don't even know why they believe it themselves? And so I find that this is something that we can do is to give them the two whys for every what,
mm.
to give them that confidence. And so this is one of the things that I do with Maven is
Yeah.
the last thing with that is then get them a part of the game, right? Get them off
Mm,
the get them away from just simply being a spectator of the Christian life and get them involved. And so I'm the director of immersive experiences at Maven. And these are specialized mission trips that we have focused on theology, apologetics, and worldview, where we train the students for 6 weeks in either theology, apologetics, or worldview. And then we take them somewhere in the country where they have to engage with the ideas that they're learning in the classroom. And so, for example, we do 6 weeks of theological training on Christian and Mormon theology, and then we take them out to Salt Lake City, Utah, where they talk to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for a week. And they go to BYU and talk to Mormons there, and they go to Temple Square, and they go door-to-door knocking, and they do all this sort of stuff. And we do the same thing with our apologetics trip, where we go to CU Boulder. I have someone from the Boulder Atheists coming to present to my group in Boulder, Colorado, coming this June. And but we do this training, and what I have found is this: we do this, we give them the whys behind the what. We then allow them to engage with people who think differently. We put them in the game and say, you are going to have to knock on the door. You're going to have to talk to someone who thinks differently. And they get beat up and they get
mm,
challenges. They don't know how to answer. And they come back and they study and they look in the books and they figure it out because they don't want to get beat up the next day. It's kind of like if you're playing a sport, but you never actually play a game and all you do is practice. People are going to get tired of
mm,
that. They're going to go, oh, I
mm,
got to go practice again. But man, when you know there's a game coming up on Friday that you got to get ready for, you're going to practice more. And if that game is one in which you get absolutely crushed by the other team and they expose all your weaknesses, and you know there's another game in 3 days, you now have something very intentional to get practice because you don't want to get crushed again. And that's the nature of it. And here's what I've seen, Vince, from these trips. I'll give you just a couple stories. We had an eighth grade student go on our apologetics trip, get trained, engage with skeptics and college students. He gets on an airplane to fly home after this week of intensive training. introduces himself to the guy sitting next to him on the plane. Now, that's just weird for an eighth grader to do to begin with, but he introduces himself to the guy sitting next to him. The guy next to him, I kid you not, I'm not making this up, is an atheist philosophy professor. This eighth grade student talks to this professor all the way from San Francisco back to New York City,
Mm.
across the whole country. And at the end, the professor says, "Hey, kid, man, you've given me a lot to think about." What eighth grader is
Wow.
going to engage in a 4 hour long philosophical conversation with an atheist college professor? And we do this, we see this all the time. Where I had a student show up in a Utah trip to talk to Mormons and just struggling, did not know what to say, did not know how to respond, did not know his stuff, but every day took it as an opportunity to learn and grow and understand. And each day he'd come back to me and say, "Ryan, look what I was able to do. I was able to point them to this, and they asked me that objection and I could answer." And he just grew in this excitement, this passion to get engaged. The trip ends, and then the pastor had taken away their phones for the whole week. But they get to the airport and they get their phones back. Now, what are most high school students going to do when you haven't had a phone for a week and you finally hand it back to you? They're going to sit there and just doom scroll, right? And just go through everything that they missed. This student sees Mormon missionaries walking through the airport and goes, "I need to share the gospel with them." And I get a picture of him evangelizing and witnessing to Mormon missionaries in the Salt Lake City, Utah airport. No leader, no pastor. I wasn't there to say, "You have to go knock on that door. You have to go talk to them." But his heart was so broken for the lost. And
Mm.
he knew that he could do this. He knew, because he had done it, that he said, "How could I stay silent?" So we have students all the time calling over missionaries. One last quick story is that
Man, that's awesome.
we had students knock on the door of a BYU professor who trains Mormon missionaries. And they had like a 2 hour conversation with this professor. Now, do you think those high school students are going to be nervous when Mormon missionaries show up at their house the next week or a month later? Of course not. They're like, "Man, we just had a 2 hour conversation with the professor who trains these guys. Of course I want to talk to them and I'm excited." So I think this is my super long answer for: be open to questions, be willing to seek out questions, and then give students the opportunity to engage intellectually with the Christian faith, because then it's not simply intellectual, but I think the intellect, our will, our desires, and our emotions are all tied into the understanding of faith, that we know God, that we love God, and we choose to follow God. That's our intellect, our emotions, and our will. And so rather than having intellectual, emotional, and volitional doubt, we instead use our intellect, our emotions, and our volition to actually create this holistic, total person faith, where we actually see passionate followers of Jesus Christ who are excited and enthusiastic about the faith, who are not just being drug along to church by their parents, but have chosen themselves to follow Jesus, and are not just
Mm.
doing the Christian life because they're supposed to do it, but they actually have missional buy-in to see this is a life worth living, and a task that they have to make disciples and to be ambassadors. That is a God-honoring, amazing life goal to have. And so I think I've seen this happen as the church has engaged students in these ways, and it's been exciting. That's why I love doing what I get to do.
Yeah, man, that is exciting. Just to hear those stories of these students engaging courageously. Can you? I love what you said there. Get them part of that game. Get them off the bench, because then you're right. Practice does get boring if you're just practicing for practice, right?
Yeah.
So, can you tell us more about Maven? Or maybe Think Well and these initiatives for those that might not be familiar with them.
Yeah, so Maven, excuse me, we do a few different things, but I'm the director of immersive experiences, which is our program where we train students and immerse them and give them an experience that immerses them in the Christian life. And so Maven also has conferences around the country, and so you can go to maventruth.com to get more information on that. But this is what we're trying to do, is to get them off the bench and to get students in the game, or at least what I do with the immersive experience program. And because it's Greg Kokel, I love his analogy. He wrote the book Tactics, of how to have your Christian convictions or discuss them. He
Mhm.
talks about putting a stone in people's shoes, and that he often says he doesn't have the goal to get to the gospel in every single conversation. And,
Mhm.
I was a baseball player, so I like his analogy, where it's like, man, if you told every student, "Hey, you're going to get up to bat, but you have to hit a home run, or else you're an utter failure." Like, that's a lot of pressure. Who's willing to get up to bat when that's it? Like, you have to hit a home run, or else you're done. And I think that sometimes is a similar pressure, when it's like you have to get the gospel and you have to get that conversion and get them to accept Jesus, or else what's the point of that conversation? instead of we recognize the Christian life is one in which we are sharing the gospel, and God is growing this fruit in people, and the harvest maybe is not ready yet, but there's different workers who are plowing and tending and cultivating, and then there are harvesters who are ready there. And for us, our job is simply in a baseball game just to get on base or put a good swing at the ball. Sometimes
Mm,
you don't even have to get on base, right? If you know baseball and you got runners in scoring position, sometimes all you have to do is get a bunt down or hit a ball up in the air and you get a sac fly and you're out, but a run scores and you
mm,
advance the team one step further. And so if you told students, man, hey, get up to bat, and I just want you to put a good swing on the ball or just at least see a pitch come in, and that'll make you better. So next
mm.
time you know what a pitch looks like and you can improve, a lot more people would say, oh, yeah, I'm willing to do that. I can do that. And I think the same thing with the Christian life is say, hey, just get out there and just give someone something to think about. And that's what I often try to do with my organization, Think Well. My show every week is I just want to, let's think well about these things, because there's a lot of things that are worth thinking about. And so let's try to think well about the Christian faith. Let's think well about our culture so that we can figure out how to engage the culture well and do what God has called us to do. And so, yeah, with Think Well, then I host a weekly, like about an hour and a half, 2 hour live stream on YouTube that I send out to podcasts and radio, where I do about a 30-40 minute teaching on some sort of topic, and then I open it up to callers. And in the last year, probably 98% of my callers have been atheists or skeptics. I think I've had 2 Christians call into the show in the last year, and I get between like 1 to 3 callers every week. So that's just again a really, I love the opportunity because I've always wanted to do apologetics in the context of evangelism. I love equipping Christians, but what are you equipping them with? It's not simply just to have a deeper understanding of their faith, which is good, but hopefully it's equipping them to engage the culture. And that's where my work in cultural engagement, my doctorate in practical theology that I'm working on, is driving my passion of how do we use this evangelistically. And so I love when atheists call in and skeptics and they push back against my content, and I get to try to, show and model how to have good conversations on things that are tough to think about but worth thinking about. So it's a blast, and I love getting to do it and encouraging students in different ways.
And with your doctorates that you're doing in practical theology, why have you chosen that specifically to go into it out of all the other topics or possibilities that you could have gone into?
Well, I mean, the short answer is well, I remember talking to some of my professors when I was in grad school and saying, here's what I want to research and what PhD should I get? And their answer was always, that's not a PhD. That's not that, that's not a research doctorate. That's a practical doctorate. So that'd be a doctor of
Mm,
ministry, which is what I'm doing. And it's kind of like, I want to give, medicine out to people, and I want to be hands-on with people and help them recover from injuries. What PhD should I get? It's like, well, you don't get a PhD, you get, your doctorate of physical therapy, or, it's like, and so recognizing the research versus the practical doctorate. And so I realized very
mm,
quickly that I did not want to be, and again, this is maybe a gross generalization, but I did not want to be just the intellectual researching one thing really in depth, like a neuroscientist would be. I want to be like the brain surgeon, hands-on. I wanted to be the MD, medical doctor, not the PhD in whatever. And so I wanted to be hands-on with people. And so that's one reason why I went with the doctor of ministry route. And then within that, I started looking, okay, what concentration do I want? And I found one that was a doctor of ministry. The technical term is a doctor of ministry in engaging mind and culture. And it had a
mm,
worldview component of how do we understand the worldview shaping our culture. It has an apologetic component. How do we bring in the truth of Christianity into the cultural context? And then there is an ethical component of how do we help Christians engage with some of the most difficult ethical issues. And at that time, I was a high school teacher, and I was teaching worldview, apologetics, and ethics. Those are my 3 high school courses. And so I thought, man, this program, and I love teaching those courses. I'm like, this program is exactly what I'm doing of how do we understand the ideas of our culture, engage them with the truth of Christianity, and then deal with the most pressing ethical issues and helping Christians live well in this cultural moment. And so, that falls under the category of practical theology, where I say, I try to help Christians make sense of the most practical, pressing issues of our day and live in 2025 as faithful followers of Jesus Christ. And so that's kind of, I started with what I want to study, how do I want to do this, and then what program kind of fits that lane of what I love doing.
nice. And what would you say is some of the most pressing issues today that we're dealing with?
Well, I can say that so far, I'm a month away from finishing all of my coursework and starting my
Mm.
dissertation. And actually, my dissertation is going to be on what I just talked about a moment ago, of that total person faith, of how do we grow and develop students to be passionate followers of Jesus Christ by helping them understand that the faith is intellectual, volitional, and emotional. So I'm excited to start my research on that in June. But I'm finishing my coursework in May, and I'll tell you what we've studied in my 3 years of coursework is year one was politics, critical race theory, and then gender and sexuality. And within that,
Oh, wow.
I decided to specialize my first year in a theology of the body and gender and
Mm.
transgenderism. And so I wrote my research paper on what does Scripture say about our bodies, and then how does an understanding of how God created our physical bodies help us respond to questions on gender and transgenderism and sexuality. And so I find that that's become
Wow.
one that I talk the most on, or a lot on recently, and have dealt with just a lot of conversations and had a lot of conversations with students and people who just come to try to make sense of and help understand how God has created them and how that makes sense of their gender identity. Year two, we focused on deconstruction, on applied ethics, so like abortion, euthanasia, that sort of stuff, environmentalism, and then uh, technology and artificial intelligence. And so I decided year two to specialize in a theology of technology and apply to AI. And so how do we
Mm.
make sense of this technological world that we live in, and what does Scripture have to say about a theology of technology? So I wrote a chapter for a book that hopefully will be coming out soon. And there's been some issues; it's on pause right now. But how do we place technology within God's big story? And it's like most people are like, well, but the Bible doesn't talk about cell phones and live streaming, so how can we understand it? It's like, yeah, but God, the Bible talks about a lot of stuff that helps us understand how to use technology well. And so those are kind of my two specialties, is technology and gender identity. This year was just focused on the transcendentals of truth, goodness, and beauty. And how do we show the truth, goodness, and beauty of God in the Christian view, and how do we understand and really present a faith that is attractive to the world? Because I think everyone is kind of inherently drawn to these transcendentals of truth, goodness, and beauty. So that's kind of what we focused on, at least in our program. Now, I know there's a lot of other issues out there that could be studied, but we obviously can't study everything. So those are kind of the 7 or 8 different topics that we've focused on for this cultural moment.
Yeah, and I mean, I think those are very relevant to what a lot of Christians that probably have a lot of questions about those, and I think at the church level, a lot of pastors are probably not even equipped to deal with a lot of those, right? Because those are really recent, developments that are happening now, and that the people in the pews are dealing with, having to have answers for those things as well,
Yeah.
right? So how can the church, you were talking about, getting them in the game, equipping them, how can the church, or maybe even parents, um, you know, start that? What can you recommend to maybe a father being like, "Hey, I got to do this. I got to get my son," or a pastor going, "Hey, we got to do something at our church to try and implement something like this."
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. I would say, I mean, start doing it by desiring to have those conversations with your students and know the questions that they are struggling with. I just had a parent this last week come to me and say, "Man, my friends' kids are struggling to make sense of all these issues, but they don't want to talk to the parents about it."
Mm.
And so that there's a challenge itself, is kind of like, well, what culture have we created to where parents don't want to talk to their kids? But again, I'm not a parent of a teenager, and so I get that that's probably true. And so then the question is, are there other trusted voices within your child's life that they can go to? And so maybe that's your role within the church, is you're not talking to your own kids, but you're a trusted voice for other people's kids. I think as parents and pastors know where to send people. So again,
Mm.
there's people way smarter than I am, but I had a youth pastor the other day who had a student struggling to make sense of medical transitioning for transgender individuals, and so the pastor contacted me and said, "Man, can you give me some resources, because I don't know how to answer these questions." And so that's
Mm.
it's him saying, "I don't know. I need help," and not just sending necessarily the student off to someone else, but I want to learn this so that I can speak into my student's life. Now, it ended up eventually leading to a conversation with the youth pastor, myself, and the student. The three of us sat down and had a long conversation on it. And so recognizing those resources are available as well. But there's great books, and I think it's sometimes is overwhelming to think about all of the issues that we have to understand and think deeply about. And we have to recognize that none of us can really, we don't have the time to think about everything. And so that's where the question begins, or that's where it starts, is to ask the question, what's the pressing issue in the lives of the people in which God has placed me in? Like, God has placed me in these people's lives. What are they struggling with? What are they dealing with? Where are they doubting? Where are they trying to make sense of Christianity and how it fits with their life? And if the answer is, well, I don't know, well, maybe that's where we start, is we start investing
Mhm.
in the people's lives that are in our circle and figuring out what's going on. And then maybe we need to study on transgenderism because that's their question. Or maybe we need to study science and faith because they're struggling to make sense of those sort of questions. And so, and then knowing kind of where to get those resources, I think is helpful.
Yeah, that's really good because I think oftentimes people would just want to try and deal with it on their own. I remember I was speaking with a pastor who was maybe 20 years my senior, had been in ministry for over 30 years. And going into pastoral ministry, I asked him, I said, what would you do differently than, maybe for some advice you can give me? And one of the things that he said was, pause for a moment. And he said, what I would do differently now is I would ask for help much faster. And I thought, whoa, okay. And I really took that to heart, so that anytime I'm dealing with something, I'll go to, an expert, or maybe in the future, I'll give you a shout and be like, hey, I know that Ryan knows a lot about this. I'm gonna give him a call. But that's such good advice, because oftentimes when they are struggling with something, they just take it on their own, right? And the church is there to carry one another's burdens. My question for you is, what have been some struggles for you, in your personal life, in ministry, family, whatever difficulties? Because oftentimes it's our struggles that shape kind of how we approach ministry, how we approach maybe apologetics, develop that compassion for others. What are some struggles that you have dealt with that have really shaped your approach to apologetics and have driven you to, specialize where you're specializing in?
Well, if I can say really quickly before I answer that, to just comment
Yeah.
on what you said, I think it's so important. One thing that I have learned as I have spent a lot more time studying issues than I previously did is that there's way more to understand about these issues than what I previously thought. And so I
Hmm.
think that not only an encouragement for people to seek help, but to recognize that these issues maybe are not as simple as you think they are. And to give a
Mm,
clear example is that when I was studying gender identity, I had an elementary school teacher ask me, "Hey, what are you studying these days?" And I said, "I'm studying gender identity." And she went, "Well, that's easy. Just look between your legs." And that was how simple the issue was. And
right.
it's like, could you imagine telling an anorexic girl, "Well, just you're not fat, just look in a mirror." Well, the issue is that when she
Right.
looks in a mirror, she does not see herself in a way that corresponds to reality, that there's a different
Mm,
brokenness there. And that, or the people that look in the mirror and hate what they see, or the people,
yeah.
and so what I realize is that there's so much more nuance and complexity to these issues, that not only
Mm,
asking for help, but then recognizing that when we oversimplify our responses and act like it's just this most simple, straightforward thing possible,
yeah.
I think it gives a false sense of an answer to students, that when they either realize, one, it's not that simple. My parent or pastor doesn't know what they're talking about, or they already
Yeah.
knew it's not that simple, which is why they're asking. And they went, "You don't know what you're talking about." And so to
Mm,
recognize, like, man, here's what I think. But let's look into this. I think that's where there's also, I think that the value of seeking out for help is that as we learn, we have to understand there's way more to this than that is often presented, or what we see on simple little social media bites. And when we are willing to
yeah.
sit down with people, my first question, and sorry, this is I was longer than what I was thinking, but when I have individuals come up to me and say, "I identify as trans," my answer is not, "No, you're not," or whatever. My answer is always, "That term can mean a lot of stuff. Do you mind if I ask you what that means to you? Like, how do you identify? And
Mm,
then tell me your story. What led you to this identity? Because there's different reasons for identifying that way." And if I can just say this, because I think it's so valuable.
yeah.
Now it's way longer than what I was thinking of an answer,
No,
but
keep going, man. This is
I
important.
I had a high school girl come up to me and say that she identified as male. And I said, "Man, thank you for trusting me with that. I appreciate it. Can I hear your story? Tell me more about it." And she was very feminine, wearing makeup, long hair, did not have the typical, appearance that you would expect. And so she goes, most people just go, "No, you're not. Look at you. You dress like a girl. You look like a girl. You wear makeup like a girl. You're not a boy. What are you talking about?"
Mm,
Her story was that her stepfather was horribly abusive to her mother. And as she grew up, she was a spitting image of her mom, looked identical to her mom. And
mm,
her thought was, if this is how he objectifies her and how he treats her, and I look just like her, then he is going to objectify me and treat me the same way. And if this is how he looks
mm,
at women, then I want nothing to do with what it means to be a woman. And so
Whoa.
she knew that that's not how all guys saw all women, but she was so horribly saw the situation that she wanted to disconnect herself from the identity of a woman as much as possible, thinking that would disconnect herself
Mm.
from the abuse that she saw her mother experience. And that is why she identified as a boy. Now, when I tell this to people, the response is often, I had no idea that this would be a reason. And the answer is exactly. Right.
Right.
When we go, it's not just, oh, people are trying to destroy women's sports, which that's true in some cases. When it's not just, well, people want to get, whatever, well, that's true in some cases. But when we say, tell me your story, rather than I feeling like I have to know everything, like I want to hear your story and where you're at, it's really powerful to be able to get a glimpse into what is going on, because that's going to respond and change how we respond. And so I think
Mm.
that's where it's really valuable to seek for help, but realize it's a lot more complex than what we often see online. And to ask people that story and to get into the nuance is actually one of the most loving, compassionate things that we can do, is we enter into that with them and walk with them,
Mm.
rather than thinking that we just have the answer out here, but it's not an answer that actually deals with the problem they have.
Yeah.
So with that, I don't know if you want to go ahead on that or now you want me to jump back and ask the question, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that it reminds me of what Jesus did, right? He didn't just kind of categorize people based off of whether they were a fisherman or a tax collector or a prostitute or what have you, right? He got to know their story,
Yeah.
and that's such a touching example of what we should be here on earth, the hands and feet of Jesus, to really not just look at someone and categorize them as black or white or in clear lines that sometimes it gets blurry. Sometimes it isn't black or white. Sometimes it's gray. And to get into their story, right? To get to into the nuances of that instead of just automatically pointing the finger and going, they're the enemy, right? But to really to see where is that struggle, where is that hurt, and to allow the light of Christ to penetrate that darkness and bring healing from that hurt. And that
Yeah.
that was where the original question was. What struggles have kind of you've gone through that have shaped your approach to apologetics and driven you
Yeah.
to maybe research the things that you've gone into.
And I think that's so good. It does really tie in well. Is the struggle I find is that and I forget where I read this. It was just recently, and I want to go back and find it because I think it was so powerful. We
Mm.
often use analogies, and those analogies sometimes become reality for us. And I think what we often use, and especially in apologetics world, is that the analogy is always saying that we're going to war. This is a battle of ideas, and we often use this sort of
Mm.
warlike language, and Scripture does too, right? Where we destroy the arguments and then every false idea that comes against Christ, and we take captive the thoughts. And so Scripture does use this. I'm not saying it's wrong to use, but if we are not careful, what has happened with me, and I know is a temptation, is that with that just goes from being an analogy to reality, to the
Mm.
where the person I'm engaging with becomes the enemy, right? Because if this is war and you're on the other side, where now you become the enemy, and if you're the enemy,
Mm.
now you are someone that I need to destroy. And so I think
Mm.
that's what we then see, and I think the algorithm sometimes feeds this as well, is that you want the clickbaity titles where
Yeah.
it's the apologist destroys the atheist, or
The
woke
drama.
student woke student gets crushed, and we
You're
love
right.
this sort
Yeah.
of language because we want to see
Yeah.
people get crushed and destroyed. And
Mm.
so that is a struggle to not only
Mm.
believe that myself, to fall in the temptation of I'm going to get them. And I think that's where it's helpful having a wonderful wife that watches my streams and I get done. And this just happened 2 weeks ago, where I got done with my stream 2 weeks ago, and I walked downstairs and she's like,
Mm.
how do you think that conversation went? Because it didn't feel like you were really understanding, and that sort of, it's like more just you're more wanting to get your point across. And I realized that
Mm.
three weeks ago I did a show on how do we think well, and one of the things about thinking well is actually listening to
Mm.
learn, not just listening to destroy or listening to respond and defeat their argument. I actually want to learn, and I actually see you as a valuable human being that I could learn something from, and then come have a better conversation. Not that I'm learning and agreeing, but learning and dialoguing with. Then simply, I'm only listening, not to learn, but I
Mm.
listen to find the fault so that I can then destroy that point and prove you wrong. And I
Mm.
did that show 3 weeks ago. Literally the very next week, I had two atheist callers that I did not do that with, and I had a
Mm.
loving wife that's Ryan, how do you think that went? I was like, you're right. I did not hold myself to that same standard. And so one of the
Mm,
books that I read pretty early on, I interviewed Darrell Bock. He is a professor of theology and New Testament at Dallas Theological Seminary. He's written commentaries on the book of Acts and I think the book of Luke are his two specialties. But he also wrote the book Cultural Intelligence. And I forget the subtitle, but it's called Cultural Intelligence by Darrell Bock. And there's something he said in that book that, man, it just hit me. And he said this: if I see the person across from me, not as an enemy, but as one that needs to be recovered, as the loss that needs to be found, I will engage differently. Right. And I
mm,
think that's the struggle. And then the thing that has led to how I want to do and strive to do ministry differently is you're not the enemy that I'm going to destroy. You are the lost that needs to be found. You are the broken that
mm,
needs healing. You are
mm.
the far out that need to be recovered. And when we see people
Wow.
in that way, we will engage differently. There's another part of the book where he says, if we recognize that these are people with backs turned against God, if we're talking about non-believers, but that there was a time in which your back was turned against God and he was gracious to you.
That's right.
That's going to change how we engage. Sean McDowell said it this way. He says, when someone is transformed by God's mercy, they will extend that mercy to others. Therefore, a
Mm,
failure, he says, to grant mercy to others reveals that we don't truly grasp the depths of God's mercy to us. And so I
mm.
think those are the struggles, and people know that about the apologetics world is it can become very intellectual and just about winning arguments and debates. And so those are then some of the ways in which I try to think about this differently to where I love it. I had an atheist last week comment on my show and say, man, I disagree with you in every fundamental way I can, but I love listening to how you engage with these ideas. And I keep coming back every single week. And he was there yesterday, disagreeing with everything I said yesterday. And then at the end of the show, commented and said, thank you for the conversation. I really appreciate it. And so I think that's where, if we can
Well,
do this well, and it's hard, it shows that I want to have a good, thoughtful conversation with people who disagree because these things are worth thinking about.
mm. Yeah, that's so good. I was speaking with Joel Setcase the other day, and one of the things that we talked about was, are we winning the argument but losing the soul? And I mean, one of the things, obviously, we know God is sovereign and He will have His way, and so whether we mess up here and there in doing our best to try and defend Him, you know, God will still bring those to Himself that are His, right? And I think we can rest on that on His
Yep.
sovereignty. But
Yep.
you're so right in having that mindset of, hey, this is not the enemy. We wrestle not with flesh and blood. We are battling the other enemy, right? Those in the higher realm, in the spiritual realm, and that this person in the flesh is not an enemy. They're an image bearer of God, and they're someone who's hurt that needs healing. They're someone who's broken that needs restoration,
Yep.
and that is the ultimate deception of the enemy, right? Is to look at one another and be like they're the enemy, and to go back to that. I love how your wife does that for you, because my wife does that for me too. There's
Yep.
times when I just know, hey, this is the right thing, and I will just say that this is the right thing, and my wife will kind of nudge me and just be like, just listen, right? Just listen, right? Or you know that that's the right thing, but maybe right now just listen.
Yeah.
um and I
Really
remember
need
a
that.
conversation that I had with online with some Muslims from, I think they were from Jordan or something like that. They spoke really good English, and we were going back and forth, right? And then at the end of it, I said, "Hey, this is a great conversation. Before we get off, can I just pray for you guys?" And they all looked at each other and they were like, "Yeah, of course." And then afterwards, it was just a pleasant, exchange. Right? We disagreed, obviously, on a lot of things, but then to leave that for them to even allow me to pray for them was, I think, a great moment. We disagreed on so much, but still to do it with gentleness, to do it with respect. That's so key. And you're right, that is such a struggle in apologetics. Um,
And it,
yeah, yeah.
and if
Go
I could
ahead.
just jump in that, because I think, man, there's so much good stuff here. Is that the question is, what is our goal? Right?
Hmm.
Is our goal transformation? Is our goal a recovery of a loss? Is our goal a healed life? Or is our goal winning an argument, getting more followers, getting more subscribers? And again,
Hmm.
it just reminds me. So here's another story. I try to make this as practical. I mean, that's probably why I do practical theology. I try to make it as practical as I can.
Yeah, I love it, man. I love
I
it.
was speaking at a summer camp where I
Mm.
was with students for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And first day of the summer camp, I spoke, first or second day, on gender identity. And I had a girl come up and she said, I identify as transgender. Thank you for speaking on this. She goes, this is one of the most compassionate approaches to gender I've ever heard. And I was like, wow, thank you. I appreciate that. Can I ask you what it means to be transgender for you? And she explained herself. And I
Mm.
said, can we have lunch? And so we went out to lunch and went to lunch at the cafeteria, and we had a long conversation. She shared her story with me. Well, a couple days later, another speaker came in and spoke about transgender individuals in this trans people are trying to destroy America and destroy women's sports, and focused on that aspect of it. And the group of students would laugh and kind of cackle, oh yeah, it's crazy how terrible they are, blah blah blah. And she goes, look, I felt like the enemy. I felt like I was not wanted there. I felt I was not,
Mm.
welcome there. I just, and that no one, that I am the one destroying America, is how she felt from this presentation. So that led to further conversations, and we talked about the whole week. And the beauty of it is that at the end of the summer camp, she sits down with me and she says, "Look, I hope I hope one day I can find healing to be content identifying as a female." I said, "Well, what are you saying?" I said, "Are you telling me that you recognize that your male gender identity is a false, distorted view of yourself?" And she says, "Yes, I do." I said, "And you're hoping
Mm.
that, like an anorexic girl, that one day you can find healing to where you can look in a mirror, identify as female, and not hate that." And she goes, "I hope I can find that healing one day." And then she wrote me later on and said,
Wow.
that I had approached the topic with such compassion and care that it made her question why she was trans. And so I think
Wow.
that's the question is we often go, well, we can be too loving, and that can be affirming or whatever, but there's
Mm.
and we need to speak of the truth, and it's like, no, but there's a way in which we can come so graciously and compassionately. That what's the
Mm.
goal? Is the goal just to prove her that her trans identity is false, that it's a
Yeah.
distorted view of herself, that God isn't, or is it to say, I actually want you to question why you view that you're trans, and to actually bring healing
Mm.
and restoration where she begins to see herself in the way that God has created her to be. And so that's where I've just found confirmation, as I believed this to be the case, and not always practiced it well, but then have seen the fruit of it, to where it actually has, I think, made people question these things, and desired to see themselves rightly in the way that God has created them to be. It's just brought a lot of hope, and to me, on man, there's a way in which we can do this differently. That again sees people as image bearers with dignity,
Mhm.
value, people that we are called to love and to support and care for and to recover, not enemy to be destroyed. So it's hard. I still do it, and that's again why we need the church, and we need spouses, and we need people in our lives that we are accountable to, that can say, "Hey, you're kind of falling into that trap again," because it's easy to fall into, and I know I do it.
Man, I am 120% with you on that. And I feel like, with the internet, right, where it kind of feels like they're not right there, like keyboard warriors, sometimes it feels like they're not a real person, right? It,
Yeah,
it, it feels like this is the enemy. And I'm right there with you, because I think we're seeing a trend, especially online, like you said, with a lot of drama, right? Atheist gets crushed, right? Agnostic silenced by this argument,
yeah,
and we got to remember, you're right. What is the goal? What is the goal? This is another human being that God loves and God cares about. What is our goal here? Is it to smash them with our intelligence, right, and with our winning arguments, because we know we have them, or is it to win a soul, right? Is
yeah,
is it is it for restoration? And man, I am 100% with you on there, man, because I just feel like um, we can also fall into that, right? We can fall into that trap, and I think, for everybody doing that, and I've made the same mistake. I'm sure I will continue to make the same mistake. But to go
yeah,
back to, okay, what is the goal? How can I be a good steward of this technology? How can I really do the right thing, honor God in trying to win this argument, right? Trying to show someone that, hey, God is the way. Um, Man, I'm so convicted. I'm so convicted, and I'm 100% with you on that. So how do we navigate? A lot of people can't really have a conversation with those that they disagree with, like have that friendship, have that relationship. How are you able to have that relationship, have that compassion, that love, someone to feel that, oh, they're not just trying to prove me wrong. This person actually wants to hear my story. This person actually cares for me. Um, how do we do that? And how do we maintain relationships with those that we 100% disagree with in some cases?
Give them time,
Mm,
value them. Um, there's an atheist that calls into my show probably every other week, and he would call in every week, except for he doesn't want to hog up all the airtime. And he said that on the show. I remember we were finishing one call, and he said something to the effect of, "Well, you don't value my ideas," or something like that.
mm,
And I said, "Well, hold on a second. Let's just think about this." And at this time, I think we had talked for like an hour. And I said, "Look, I gave you an hour of airtime on my show. I didn't cut you off. I think that's a big one, is like actually listening and not to just, oh, wait, this is what you said is wrong, but like not cutting people off, being respectful. I said, I didn't cancel you. I didn't laugh at you. I didn't mock
mm,
you. I didn't say, oh, look at this silly atheist and then delete you from my show to, and get a bunch of laughs out of my followers and go, yeah,
mm,
the atheist got destroyed. I said, I valued you enough to say, I want to hear your ideas. And then I valued the ideas enough to say, I want to think deeply about them and think well about them, not just simply dismiss them as being silly. And I said, that's how we value ideas and people that we disagree with, is to say, I actually want to hear you out. And I want to listen to you. I think there's an aspect of that one of the most common comments I get is like, man, I don't know how you do it. In the sense, like, how do you stay patient? And part of it's like, well, I don't get offended. Like,
mm,
what would I expect them to say? Like, if they don't think Christianity is true, then I would expect them to use the common arguments of Jesus is just a pagan mythology, stolen from pagan mythology, or the Bible's full of contradictions, or God is evil because he allowed certain things in the Old Testament. And those are the answers I expect. And so when
mm,
they are then said, I'm not like, how dare you attack my view? Again, it's kind of what we talked about before of like, this is not just like a thing to panic about. And, oh my goodness, look at the state of America and all the people objecting to Christianity. But look at the opportunity we have here about
mm,
people who are asking questions and desiring to engage. And so I think there's I should look this up again because I don't, actually, I might actually have it here somewhere. Um, there was something I read somewhere, and I don't know if I can find it in the next like minute,
mm,
but so I think it might be in the footnotes of one of my presentations. But it said something to the effect of like 85%. Here it is,
mm.
83.
Okay.
83% of non-Christians want to talk to a Christian, but don't think that the Christian wants to talk to them. Like
Mm.
when I saw that study, Vince, I was like, wait, what? Like, why don't like non-Christians want to talk to Christians?
Right.
But they don't think Christians want to talk to them. Well, why not? Is it possible? And I don't know all the different answers, but is it possible, from what I've experienced and what I've seen, is that the way in which we talk about non-believers, the way in which we talk about different ideas, is we
Mm,
misrepresent them and show them to be silly, dumb things, to where, why would the person trust you that you are someone who is thoughtful about these ideas and someone who they can trust with these ideas, to where someone can come to you and say, I struggle with my gender confusion or whatever, and you're someone that they can trust with that information that's going to respond well, rather than joke about it and dismiss about it. Because if we're all making gay jokes in our circles and trans jokes in our circles, then
mm,
the person who's struggling with gender dysphoria or gender confusion is not going to look at you as someone that they can talk to about it. And I think that
right.
this is convicting of how do we talk about people who hold different views than us. And it's not just different views across the Christian, non-Christian spectrum. It's even within Christianity. I've had Christians mock theological views that I hold, not knowing I hold them. Can
Mm.
you believe this? There are Christians that some dumb Christians believe this. And I'm like, and you're talking to one right now. And it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
when we think, I mean, this is just normal, right? Is when we think
Mm,
that we're in a safe space, we
yeah.
often are a little bit more loose with how we speak about people who are different.
Right.
And so then the question is it possible then that you're like, man, how do I have this conversation? Well, the short answer is they probably want to have the conversation with you, but they don't think
Hmm.
that you want to have it. Maybe because the way that you speak about it or the way that you engage with people who think differently shows that you're not someone maybe they want to engage with. And so I think part of it is recognizing, how do I speak about outsiders? How do I speak about people who are part of different groups? And then also, like, you start doing it. And this is
Mm,
one thing I love about Maven, is that we force the students to go onto college campuses or knock on doors to go talk to people about Jesus. And what they often find is that people are willing to talk, and willing to talk longer than what they
mm,
expect. Where like We often go door to door at BYU, and the students come back, and it's like, "How was your conversation?" "Oh, we only got into one conversation." "Why is that?" "Well, because it was a 3 hour long conversation." I'm like, that college student just gave up 3 hours of their afternoon to chat with you because they want
Mhm.
to have this sort of conversation. I think that's also
Yeah.
a motivating factor when we think about how do I engage with people who are different is be curious. So I'll give one more story. I had a student on immersive experience with me this summer, and he gets home and it just made him curious. And so he's sitting down at dinner, at a Christmas dinner, and his uncle comes over, whose uncle's an atheist and a vegan. And rather than be like, "Oh, there's crazy uncle," he's like, "Hey, uncle, why do you hold these views? Why are you vegan? Tell me about this. What's your?" And he just was
Mhm.
curious,
Mm.
and he didn't have all the answers. He wasn't trying to prove his uncle wrong, but he just wanted to know, why does uncle hold views that are different than us? And I just want to know.
Mm.
And then his uncle said, "Well, it's based on this report." He goes, "Can you send me the report? I'd like to read it." I mean, those are the attitudes that we can have of just saying, "I want to be a learner. I want to be
Yeah.
curious, and I want to think about these things." And when you do that, you show the uncle that you're interested, and then he's more willing to engage and share with you. And then you learn about those things, and you can come back next time and say, "Hey, I read that article you sent me. I have some questions about it. Can I ask these questions?" "Yeah, sure. What are your questions?" "Okay, well, it said this, and here's why I don't think that's maybe true. How would you respond?" And again, you approach it in that curious, perspective, and it leads to, I think, good conversations, and it takes the pressure off of you thinking that you have to know everything. No, I'm here
Mhm.
to learn. I'm here to be curious, and that's something that anyone can do.
Yeah, you're right. Taking that pressure off yourself to transform them, right? Or to
Yeah.
get them to think something else. We had somebody in a Bible study group the other day, also talking about veganism, right? And they're asking me, "Oh, what do you think the Bible says about it?" And they were going from verse to verse to verse. And I noticed that as I was answering them, I noticed their body language kind of close up, right? Arms close in there, and then and then as soon as I noticed that, I said, "Well, what is our relationship with God like?" And then I took the example of his child, and I said, "Before, when were you there when your child was born?" "Yeah, I was." And when were you able to hold him for the first time?" "Yeah, I was able to hold him for the first time." I said, "Wow, amazing." "And as you held him, did you love him in that moment?" "Yeah, I loved him so much in that moment." I said, "Well, that's God with us. That's why we can call him Abba Father. That's why our prayer starts with our Heavenly Father, because that's how he sees us, not by what we're eating or what we're doing." And I noticed his body just relax in that moment, right? I didn't bring up anything anymore because I noticed that he'd get tense when I brought it up. Instead, I just kept talking about God. I kept talking about God's love, and by the end of that conversation, he was totally in, and he was like, "Well, what about this?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think about this?" You know, I think you're right. When we take the pressure off ourselves to try and get that, home run, and
Yes.
just be like, "Oh, can I just get to know them a little more? Can I get to know their backstory?" And then I learned about how he got into it and why, and these other people in the past that have made fun of him because of his veganism, that got him to like clam up and almost become self-defensive in it, right? Defensive. And then to do that research and then to realize, oh, okay, you're doing this research on here. What's the type of research? Oh, okay, you watch this movie. Okay, let me look into that. And
Yeah.
to understand at that level, at least now there's that relationship, right?
Yes.
I love it you talking about that atheist who's going on your show, because there's also an atheist that would often comment, right, and really get angry with exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. And oftentimes my reply would just be like, hey Anthony, how was your weekend? I'm praying for you.
Yeah.
And they're like, you still haven't showed me evidence, and just to respond in that way. But granted, a lot of people find that difficult not to get offended, right? Like one of the things that you were saying was, don't get offended by it. Like we should expect that they're gonna disagree with us and that they see things in this light. What's some advice that you can have for people to not be offended?
Oh man, I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. I think it's so good to just think about the practical aspects of how do we do this in real life and how do we do it. Man, that's just your question, and I laugh because I don't know what to say because I don't do it well. And it's like saying, I know my 3-year-old is going to disobey me, so I shouldn't get offended and mad when he does. But when I go downstairs and he just blatantly disrespects me or disobeys me, it makes the blood boil and it makes me mad. And it's like, come on, just listen to me. What are you talking about? And so it's like we are we are broken, fallen human beings
Mm,
who often do not respond well. And so part of that,
mm,
I think part of it maybe is just recognizing and giving ourselves some grace of I'm not
mm,
always going to do this well. And we are emotional people, and that is a good
Yeah.
thing. And I think recognizing too, maybe here's a part of the solution, is recognizing how emotional we actually are. I was reading a
Mm.
book called How to Think by Alan Jacobs, I believe. And he's a professor at Baylor University, and he talked about how we we often say, "No, just get your emotions out of it. I just think intellectually about this." And he goes, "That's not even possible." And he goes, and if you could do it, you wouldn't want to."
Mm.
And the reality is that we recognize how emotional we really are when we either one dismiss claims or are unwilling to even listen to claims because it contradicts with what we believe is true. And we have our in group and we have our emotional buy in to an idea. And therefore, when someone presents an objection against it, we just dismiss that objection as being, not having weight. And it's not actually because we've investigated it intellectually, it's because of our emotional buy in with our previous community or group. And so, I
Right.
mean, that's true. This happens too. You think about different ideas might come up, and I might have some political idea that I hold get challenged, and I
Mm.
think, well, I could investigate this political idea, but in doing so, it had actually upset maybe my five closest friends, and if I switch sides or if I switch points on this issue, they will all maybe stop being friends with me. And so I can investigate, possibly see that what I believe is false, and I will improve my intellectual life by holding one more true idea to false idea than what I had previously held. But in the meantime, I'll lose five of my closest friends.
Mm.
Most of us do that intellectual balancing act in our mind and go, yeah, not worth it. I'm not going to investigate.
Mm.
I'd rather just sit where I am because my relationships and my friends matter. And I know for a fact that there are issues that I have not spoken on or investigated deeply because it would go against my in group, my
Mm.
that community. And so we recognize our emotions really do have a driving factor in how we think. The issue though, and what I love about his book is to recognize we can't think deeply about everything. He breaks it down into what he calls I forget how he defines it, but like first order thinking and second order thinking. And first order is your gut reactions, your instincts, your initial judgments, your quick snap judgments. And some people say, no, don't have that. That's all driven by emotion. Don't follow that. Just think deeply about everything. And he goes, well, you can't. You
Mm.
literally cannot do the intellectual lifting to think deeply about everything. The question is this: how do we think deeply about the things that matter to then shape? How do we use our second order thinking, our deep conscious thinking about something, to then shape our first order thinking? And we go through life living based on first order, where everything we're doing is snap judgments and quick thinking. And it's not until something contradicts that first order thinking or comes up against it that we then say, whoa, that doesn't fit with my picture. Let me think about this.
Mm.
Let me make sense of this. And so that we recognize though that first order, that level one thinking is adaptable, is directionable. You can move it, you can shape it, you can cultivate it. And so I think that's the question: is how do I cultivate, by thinking deeply about things that matter, how do I cultivate my emotions and my gut reactions and my presuppositions to where they respond appropriately, to where when something sad actually makes me sad, and so something happy
Mm.
makes me happy, and something wrong makes me go, ugh. He calls it that, I forget what he calls it, but that ick factor. Like we all have that. The question is, are the right things making us go ick?
Mm.
And so I would say that, look, it's easy to say, well, stop being emotional and just don't get upset. But the emotions are valuable in how we engage, and we need them and
Mm.
we rely on them. And so the question is, how do I appropriately cultivate these to where I'm not saying don't ever get emotional, but we recognize when we maybe are getting too emotional, we need to take a step back.
Mm.
And also the question is, well, why am I getting emotional? Why did this upset me? When this comment that this person made, why did that make me repulse back and
Mm.
go, oh, why did I get that ick factor at that comment? Is it
Mm.
because I don't know the answer and I didn't like that I was being challenged? Or is it because maybe that thing that they said is actually disgusting and gross and we should have gone, oh no, and been upset at it? But then how do we
Mm.
come back and go, hey, hold on a second. What you just said was, wow, that really, you believe that? Like, and let, kind of hold their feet to the fire a little bit, so,
Mm.
um, I don't know. It's a long answer and I don't know if I've made sense of it for anyone listening, but I think it's how do we cultivate things rightly and then be able to stop and reflect on, if I'm not responding in the way I want to respond,
Mm.
why not? What bothered me about that comment? And how can I be better at responding in the future, or
Mm.
engage better next time that comment is said to me?
Mm. Yeah, I like that idea of kind of self-reflection, self-analysis of those moments, right? When you're taking a shower and I'm having this conversation with God, just kind of asking him, okay, did I handle that situation right? Is where's that emotion coming from? Is that an emotion that is, you know, legitimate, or is there some deep-seated hurt that I need to deal with from the
Yeah,
past that is triggering that? Like, what is triggering that? Is truth triggering that? Or is sin triggering it? Is pride
yeah,
triggering it?
yeah.
And to be able to look within and look above and ask God to help us through that. And I find that he will, but we have to have the humility to go, is this right? Is this honoring you, God? Is this revering you, God? And I think what you said about just to be able to self-reflect and ask ourselves those are important questions. Thank God for those of us that have wives, right? Oftentimes our wives will be the one to see what we don't see. They're like our
Yeah.
blind spot, our blind spot warning, right, in the car. And yeah, thank God for them. um, I'm just thinking about my wife right now, and being able to sit down with her. And sometimes we think like, no, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. And then she has this ability to kind of see like, well, how will this person react, how will this person feel about it, right? And sometimes I'm just like a bulldozer, and I'll just go, no,
Yeah.
we'll just bulldoze through those emotions. But you're right, emotions do matter. How do we deal with those? And I think about how God deals with us with our emotions, how patient he is with us when we are off the cliff with our emotions, how merciful is he, and how many chances he gives to us time and time again. He took all of that darkness, nailed it to the cross. Um, and yeah, that's really important. Um, what misconceptions do you think skeptics have about, because that stat is still in my mind, that 83%, and that is staggering. That is shocking to me. Wow, like one in, like two and eight. I mean, 8 and 10 want to speak to
8
us,
and 10.
right?
Yeah.
Um, that is a staggering statistic. What do you think? What misconceptions do you think they have of Christians to be like, oh yeah, Christians don't want to talk with us, other than some of the ones that you mentioned, right? Maybe watching Christians on TikTok who might not be representing the whole body, right? There might be Christians out there who want to have a conversation with respect, with gentleness, but then maybe they're looking at some of the more abrasive channels out there who are mocking um, non-Christians and thinking, oh, this is what all Christians are like. And so
Yeah.
we don't want to talk. They hate us. All Christians actually hate us, that we don't believe in it. Yeah, what do you think are some of those misconceptions, and what can we do, like with your show, with my show, to maybe like just be a better example out there?
Yeah, I think there's a few that come to mind. Number one, I think, well, studies will show that when asking non-Christians, what word comes to mind first when you think of a Christian, right? The overwhelming first answer is judgmental.
Hmm.
And so if that's how people are going to see us, is that that's how they do see us, is that we are judgmental, then they're not going to want to engage with us, because the moment they bring up a different idea or a false view or whatever it may be, we're just going to judge. And
Hmm.
that's at least their perception of Christians. And so, that perception becomes a reality, and then they don't want to engage. Whether you
Hmm.
are someone who would judge or not, that's what they think. And so I think that's something to
Hmm.
think about from the research, is just how the world perceives Christians to be. Then the question is, well, is there some truth there on how we engage and how we talk to people?
Yeah.
Sometimes does come across that way. I think the other thing that comes to mind is our focus. If we are
Hmm.
only focusing on what is true versus, again, focusing on what is good, right? The two whys behind every what. So
Hmm.
I remember speaking on the topic of sexuality to a group of students, and
Yeah.
there was a transgender queer student in the group, and and I got done, and I remember being kind of nervous. This was like one of the first times I was speaking on the topic of gender and sexuality to a group, knowing there was a queer student in the group. And so I just did the best I could to present the beauty of God's design for sexuality. Not just what's true, that God designed
Hmm.
men and women, and God and marriage, is sex in the context of marriage and no other context. And here's what's sin and what's not sin, not just what's true. But actually, this is not just something that's true, but this is something that is good and beautiful. And
Mhm.
so I remember stressing and trying to use, there's apologists, and I'm forgetting her name right now, but it talks about, imaginative apologetics. Like, how do we awaken people's imagination to just think of things differently? Not just, again, as we're just truth people, but we are emotional and we're thinkers and we like
Mhm.
imagining things. So I remember just focusing on trying to show the beauty and goodness of sexuality, not just simply what was true. And I get done, and this girl's hand shoots straight up. And I was like, all right, here we come. And I will never forget her answer. She said, a lot of people in the queer community and trans community that I'm in would get instantly triggered the moment you say God, Jesus, Bible, anything of that nature. She then stops and goes, but if more people approach the topic like this, it would bring healing between the sides rather than division. And that just stuck with me. And I remember then I asked the rest of the students in that group, and I said, who of you grew up in the church? And like almost all of them, is a Christian school. And I said, how many of you have ever heard gender and sexuality presented in this way? And they all said, no one. None of us have ever
Mhm.
heard things talked about as being good and beautiful. So I think that's one of the
Mhm.
things that we can do is to say, if we've only been, here's what's true, here's what's true, here's what's true, believe it. The question is maybe they don't want to engage, versus if we can actually, now the positive side is, how do we show the goodness and the beauty of God's design for our world and us and the Bible and Christianity? It's not something that's just true, but it's good. The other one
Mhm.
that I think is the third thing that comes to mind is taking their questions seriously. I know the atheists that show up at my channel get really frustrated when they raise what they think are good objections, and the Christian either just punts to faith and goes, "Oh, I don't know, just have faith," or is unwilling to even engage or to thoughtfully, think about what this person is asking or
Mhm.
objecting to. And again, there's maybe a lot of reasons why someone might do that. But again, that's where I think my encouragement is, if you don't know, rather than just punting to mystery and saying, the very common Christian, well, we don't understand. We'll figure it out one day. Well, that's probably true, but maybe it's something that we can figure out now. Now, we can't figure out everything, right? There's aspects of God that is mystery, as he is transcendent and eternal and beyond our ability to wrap our finite, limited minds around. But yet we also recognize that he has revealed himself to us, that while we can't know God fully, we can know him truly. We can know true things about
Mhm.
him. And so I think the last thing is, does the non-believer think that you are actually going to engage with his or her questions or challenges? Or are you just going to dismiss them as being, well, you just are trying to destroy my faith, and you're just trying to destroy Christianity, and I'm not going to talk to you. Um, and it's one of the things that we talk about with Mormons is, we hear a lot of stories of people that will engage with Mormons, and after the Mormons show up at their house about 2 times, they'll say, "Look, you guys are not going to convert to Christianity. I'm not going to convert to Mormonism. I don't know why we do this. I think it's best if we just don't continue." And my response when I'm told this is,
Mhm.
"You expected them to convert to Christianity after 2 hours of talking to you? It's something that they're literally on mission for right now and have been born and raised believing, and you expect that in just 2 hours of your talking, you expect no, would you convert to Mormonism in 2 hours? Well, of course not. Well, then why do you expect them to convert to Christianity in 2 hours? Here
Mhm.
you have the opportunity. Someone is willing to come to your house every single week and engage with you. You don't even have to leave your home to evangelize. And that's what I'm very encouraged is, like, I have family who live in LDS areas, and they've been meeting my brother with Mormons every week for the last like 2 years.
Mhm.
And it got to where the Mormon stake president was at his house like 2 days ago, and then invited them over to his house for dinner. I mean, he
Mhm.
is like friends with the community, and they love it because he challenges, he pushes back, and they're like, we love your questions, and they're engaging with him because they show that he's someone that takes it seriously and wants to engage well. And so I think these hopefully are three things. Is like, are we coming across as judgmental? Are we always just talking about how horrible everyone else is? Number two is, are we actually presenting how Christianity is both beautiful and good rather than just only true, and actually inviting people in to consider a compelling, beautiful story? And then also,
Mhm.
I think showing that we're willing to engage and not just dismiss them as being enemies of God who are just trying to destroy Christianity and destroy our faith, but taking those questions and challenges seriously. I don't know. Those are the three that come to mind of stories that I hear of why people probably would look at Christians and go, "Yeah, I want to talk to you, but I don't think you're willing to talk to me."
Right. Man, that's really good. And I never kind of broke it down that way, but it's brilliant how you're able to go, okay, if we do this, we do this, we do this, that might help. But yeah, so yeah, good and beautiful. So imaginative apologetics. I've never heard of that. What is that exactly?
Well, I wish I could tell you better. I'm actually that's the next book on my list to read,
Okay,
and
cool,
so
cool.
I have to read that book before April 28th, and write a paper on it. But it's sitting on my queue. I just started a book on spiritual friendship this morning, and then that one's next. But I interviewed
Mm,
her. Let me just look this up if I can, just really fast, because it's
yeah.
I did an interview with the author, but it was
Mm.
like 5 years ago, and for some reason
Oh,
her
okay.
name is just completely missing my jumping out of my mind. Of course, my computer's being very slow. Um,
I'll try and
but
look it up here on my end too.
it's let's see. Oh, YouTube is being slow. So, but it's the idea of that. Look, how do we use our imagination? How does our
Mm,
imagination shape how we view reality? I know there's even aspects of this that I talked about before, where where we imagine conversations being like war, and then that starts to shape how we view people. I know
mm,
in my topic of technology, we often use a lot of analogies, and we say, well, our brain is like a computer,
mm.
and that it was like a computer for so long. Uh, I'm typing it really quickly,
Is it Andrew
that we start to say,
Davison?
no, sorry, Holly Ordway. So I
Ah,
interviewed her 4 years ago. My video is titled "The Central Role of Imagination in Christianity" with Dr. Holly Ordway.
mm,
She wrote the book. I can get you the name of it here in a second. Um, she wrote the book on the Christian imagination, but the idea is we sometimes start to see like, oh, okay, my brain is like a computer, to then my brain is a computer. Um,
mm.
she wrote the book called Apologetics and the Christian
Christian
Imagination,
imagination. Okay.
an integrated approach to defending the faith. And so I think the here is recognizing how powerful our imagination is. And I think this is also where it comes to, how do we tell a more compelling and beautiful story to get people to consider something different, imagine something different. Imagine if the world was like this. And you often hear
Mm,
this in topics of gender and sexuality, of like, imagine if everyone lived the sexual ethic of Jesus. There would be no STDs. There would be no abortions. There would be no deadbeat dads leaving their families for some other woman. There would be no, this. There would
mm,
be no that. And he was like, imagine that world. And John Lennon has the famous song, "Imagine." It's like, hey, use your imagination and consider a world like this,
mm.
and how beautiful that is. The Christian ethic is a beautiful ethic that would really rid us from all of these issues and sexual
Yeah.
exploitations that we see in our culture. And that's not just, excuse me, it's not just
Mm,
in our imagination. That can actually be reality. And so
mhm,
I think that's kind of the idea here. And I know, that we talk about this a lot in evangelizing with Mormons, is that generally speaking, LDS have a less of an emphasis on doctrine and theology than evangelical Christians do. And so if we just show up and say, okay, here's the doctrine of the Trinity, and here's where your doctrine is mistaken, and here's where our doctrine is correct, and it's a purely doctrinal, theological conversation, we often lose them.
mm.
They're very story driven. And so the question is, okay, how has the nature of God and the Trinitarian idea of Jesus being God, how has that impacted your life? And how is this something beautiful in which God interacts with the triune being, but then also with us in different ways? And so to, again, show the beauty in inviting people into that Christian story, as Greg Coco calls it, the story of reality, that we are all playing a piece of. We're a small part of that puzzle of God's ultimate story of creation, fall, redemption, restoration, where we are in the redemption applied section, where the church is now at mission to seek and evangelize the lost and disciple and bring people to relationship with Jesus before the final restoration of all things when Jesus comes back. And so, again, I think seeing it as that story, using people to imagine what things would be like, what heaven will be like, what the Christian life could be like, I think is a powerful tool that we often miss when our apologetics is just purely intellectual and propositional, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes total sense. And oftentimes we can get caught in this intellectual battle and really, like you said, miss the beauty, the practicality of it. And going back to what you were saying on, taking their questions seriously, I'm probably guilty of that too, because sometimes we've seen or heard these questions time and time again, and we're like, oh, we already know the answer to this, right? I've already answered this, and how can they not see the truth out of this?
Right.
So being able to, yeah, take someone's questions seriously, that is really tough. But we do that with our kids, right? Like we know the
Yeah.
answer to their sometimes very simple questions. If it's 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, but to listen intently and take it seriously is important for the kid, right? Not necessarily for us, but to know that, okay, yeah, my dad takes me seriously. My dad doesn't think I'm just a joke, right? And he is answering this sincerely. I think that is that is very important. How do we then? How do you balance, making it beautiful, right? Jesus came full of truth and grace. How do you balance that in apologetics where, okay, yeah, you don't want to back down, you want to give the truth, but you want to give it in a way that is beautiful, you want to give it in a way that is loving. um you know how do you was it John Maxwell that said, okay, when you're going to correct someone, do the sandwich method, right? Compliment,
Yeah.
give the meat, and then give the other compliment bun. How do you do that in apologetics, in a way that, because it seems like you've been able to do that in a lot of the examples that you've given us. You've been able to, touch a heart, not just kind of stimulate their brain and get them thinking,
Mm,
but really get them to see, the heart. And for them, others must be able to see that, okay, Ryan is sincerely considering my question here. Wow, Ryan is wants to know my story. How can someone balance that? But at the same time, you're not backing down, right? You're
yeah.
still speaking the truth, but you're doing it in a way that really gets them to see, okay, yeah, he's interested in me. He's interested in my story.
Man, that's so hard. Um, it almost
I
it
love your sincerity, by the way. I love your transparency and just being like, man, I don't have it all together.
yeah, I mean, the more I study, the more I realize how little I have together.
Right?
Um, you know, okay, back to um, uh, the book How to Think.
Hmm.
Um, Alan Jacobs. He writes. Oh, now I just completely missed my mind. Um, oh, I had the perfect answer to your question, and it is gone. What was the question again? How do we have the
Yeah.
um, oh, man, now it's really bothering me that this point from Alan Jacobs that I thought was so brilliant is gone, and again, it's not my point, it's something I read, I just read a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Balancing that kind of truth and love and getting them to see that, um, we're taking their questions seriously, that we want to hear their story, that we see them, that we value them, but also
yeah,
not backing down on the truth.
um, yeah, it's gone, hopefully it
It's
comes back.
gone.
And I think, again, but I think it comes down to, does our do our emotions reflect like a broken heart? Do we recognize that these are big questions? Do we take them seriously? Do we want to stop and listen and think through the things that they're saying?
Mm,
I we it's easy to be dismissive, and I know this happens to me all the time, right? The simple
mm,
questions, like, it's like I've answered a million times. Who created God? If everything has a, it's like, well, no, it's a category fallacy. No one did. God's eternal. Why not the universe? Well, because we have evidence the universe was began. So, but it's recognizing this may be the first time. Like, I've thought about these things a million times.
mhm,
I do this for a living. I've been
mhm,
doing apologetics, consistently and in a sense being paid in one way or another for the last 10 years,
mm,
whether it was teaching high school apologetics or now doing full-time ministry.
yeah,
But the student I'm talking to maybe is having this challenge, being faced with this for the very first time,
mhm,
or has just had this thought in their mind pop in their head. Well, where did that come from? And so
right,
recognizing everyone is at the different point of the journey, and how do I see that well? So again, same thing with my kids. I'm not expecting my 3-year-old to understand math or whatever that he just
mhm,
doesn't know because he hasn't learned these things yet. And so I think there's ways in which we can come alongside and saying, I want to journey with you, to be a guide, to be a mentor, to be a resource,
mhm,
to take your thoughts seriously. I think are just are so valuable. And again, showing that the goal
mhm,
is you. I care about you. I care about people. That's why we're here. There's people behind every argument, and there's
mhm,
different reasons why they make the argument that they make. There's different driving factors and different motivations and different presuppositions, and it's their story, their upbringing, that often leads to the certain conclusions that they come to on different theological ideas. And so again, entering into that space, I think, is a powerful way that if we truly want to understand them and know them, and point them to a beautiful true God, it
mhm.
involves understanding kind of where they have misconceptions about who he is.
Right, right. I remember I remember I think it was Christmas time, and my nephew, no, my little cousin, who was 3 years old, came up to me, and I was about to eat this chocolate biscuit, um, and he comes up to me, and he says "kuya," which means brother, like big brother. He's "kuya, kuya. What is that?" And I said, "Oh, it's an individually wrapped sugar-free biscuit." And he kind of looked up at me, and he was like, can I have one?" And I could have just said it's a cookie, right? Or it's dark chocolate, whatever. And I realized at that moment that, way over explained it. How do you do that also in apologetics, where, like you, who's been studying this for, um, a decade, over a decade, and doing it at a professional level? How do you also speak at their level? Because there is, I mean, you were first inspired by William Lane Craig, and even
Right.
today, I have sometimes trouble like grasping some of his ideas when he can really get on a roll there, right? How about like a high school student or a college student that might not be able to grasp these very complex topics? How do you bring it back to somebody's level? How do you recognize, okay, I might not use this word or this analogy, I might break it down so that they can understand it at a level that they can comprehend it.
Yeah.
How do you speak to somebody's level like that?
A lot of failures, a lot of mistakes, a lot of explaining it in ways that people look at you and go, "Huh?" And you're like, "Okay, that's not a good way to explain it." Like, honestly, it's like it's I've been doing this a long time, and I was a full-time high school teacher for 12 years. And so I had
Yeah,
literally every single day in the classroom trying to figure out, how do I break down these ideas in a way that a high schooler can understand. And so
yeah,
it just is a lot of trial and error, a lot of practice, a lot of trying to figure out what can they make sense of. And then there's also I believe very strongly in trying to stretch students, especially theologically. We often, joke that, students will be, in AP physics and AP calculus and AP US history and AP government. But then as long as they just have some basic Bible stories, we're good. Just, memorize a few verses and we're good. It's like,
mm,
why don't we stretch them intellectually in the Christian faith and in theology and the nature of God? Because they can
right,
handle it. They're an AP
yeah,
everything else. And
hmm,
so I definitely believe in, like, I want to put these things in a way that are going to stretch them, that are going to push them. I remember when I started my doctorate when I was still teaching high school. In fact, the gender and sexuality thing. And I remember going into class one day and I went, "Okay, guys, I just learned this in my class last week." And they're like, "Really? You're going to teach us doctoral level theology in a high school level class?" I'm like, "Yeah, because you can get it. This shouldn't be like coming down to your level. It shouldn't just be up at mine." And I remember them. That also was like an exciting thing for them.
mm,
I think one of the things that sometimes leads to students being bored and apathetic with the faith is that it's a shallow faith. So I
mm,
was speaking at one summer camp, and this girl told me, she goes, "I've been a Christian for 2 years, and I'm already kind of bored with the faith." Now, she didn't tell me why, but so I just began to imagine. I started just kind of speculate what could be the reason. I'm like, well, I wonder if maybe her youth pastor is on repeat, where she's already
mm,
heard, she thinks that she's already heard it all. And so after 2 years, it's like, well, there's nothing left to learn. I've got it figured out. And I'm like, how silly is that?
mm,
Speaking of William Lane Craig, he spent 12 years studying God's relationship to time. Like, just
right,
one. I had an atheist challenging me the other day, and he's like, "Well, the science is amazing because a scientist will spend his entire life devoted to answering one question, make a very small contribution in that one area, and that's seen as a success. But theology is just, we'll believe the book and that's it." I'm like, "All right, well, that's a very weird straw man and, kind of false dichotomy."
yeah,
Because there are people like William Lane Craig and others who are brilliant theologians who specialize in one thing, to spend 12 years studying God's relationship to time to try to answer
wow,
one question. And that's one tiny little aspect of what we know about God. And so I thought,
hmm,
how are we talking about things, and how are we presenting this to high schoolers where they think that after being a Christian for 2 years, they've learned all there is to learn about the Christian faith?
yeah,
And is it possible? It's like US history, we started and now here we are. And it's like, well, if that's all there is to US history, then it's like, well, why, and again, the other aspect is, why do people not like, I hated geometry. It was the worst
mm,
subject, because the question that everyone asks with geometry is, why does this matter? Why do I have to learn about two trains going in? I don't know if that's even geometry, or two angles, and figuring out, it's like, unless I'm in, architecture or whatever, like, I don't need to know angles and whatnot. And so again, are we discussing the why it matters in a way that then
mm,
students again, we're awakening the imagination and the curiosity within students to where then they actually are curious. Oh,
Mm.
what's his name? There's an author, um, Greg Gansel, wrote a book called Our Deepest Desires. And it's an argument from desire that's kind of taken from C.S. Lewis, but this idea of like our deepest desires draw us to be curious and to understand God. I remember asking Greg Gansel at Talbot, like, what about the people who just don't have those desires, don't have those thoughts, those questions? And he's like, well, you have to awaken them. You have to
Hmm.
pique their curiosity. You have to ask those questions that get them to be curious. And so I think when we do that, we then have, excuse me, I'm still getting over sickness. We then, when I am piquing the curiosity of students to where then they start asking more questions that they didn't even know to ask to begin with, then that
Hmm.
is causing me to engage with the questions that I would not have previously engaged with. And then I'm getting in the game and I'm practicing how to have these sort of conversations. And you answer a question, you go, does that make sense? And they go, no. You go, okay, what's another way I can say this? And then through a lot of trial and error, you figure out how to put this in a way that students can catch it while also stretching them and challenging them to take it deeper than they ever have.
Yeah, yeah, man. I got a ton of questions left for you, but I don't want to keep you any further. What what's new and exciting coming up for you? How can people get in touch with you, and where can they, reach you in your lives and such?
New and exciting, man. There's lots of fun stuff. So I start teaching. I actually just got hired. So I start teaching at
That's
Biola next
awesome.
month. And so I'm really pumped about that. I'm
Wow.
teaching undergraduate class on why God allows evil.
Hmm.
I finished my doctoral coursework at the end of May. So people can be praying for me. I have to
Yeah.
still read three books. I have to finish, and I have to write about 50 pages worth of papers by April 28 and May 5 are my two due dates. And so that's like just over a week away, and I'm a long ways away from being done with that. So they can just be praying for me to get that work done. And then starting my dissertation for a year and a half, I'll be studying how do we develop students a deeper, thicker, durable faith that will hopefully drive them out of apathy and away from deconstruction. And so that's a project I'm working on that I could use a lot of prayer for. There's a lot of trips coming up, Maven trips, speaking events. I would love to speak more places. God
Hmm.
has really given me a passion and desire to train and equip the church, and so I just love every opportunity I can to get that information out there. So I see that, thankfully, and thanks to you, my website there, think-well.org, is there that people can go and see all the things I speak on and request me to speak at their camp or conference or church. I also have training letters, and this is kind of hard to find. I might need to find a better way to put it on my website. But if you sign up for my training letter, I send out email training letters that kind of go deeper into some of these issues. I also provide, just for signing up, people can get my paper I wrote on a theology of the body and transgenderism to help make sense of that issue. They can also get a discount on my merch that I have, my Think Well merch. I'm wearing one of the shirts. And so there's some, incentives there to do that. But hopefully that's ways that they can connect. I send out prayer emails. I send out ministry updates that they can connect with. And so I forget exactly where on the website they can find that training letter, but I'll try to, maybe on the about page or something, I'll make it a little bit more obvious. And so those are ways they can connect. Again, on social media, Ryan Pauly 3, I post a lot of content. My YouTube channel is just Ryan Pauly, where I do weekly live streams every Tuesday afternoon where I take callers. So if anyone wants to call in and talk with me about different issues or challenges you received, that is available on YouTube every Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. So all that more information can be found there on my website or any social media handle. They can connect with me and ask more questions.
Nice. Well, there you
Yeah,
guys have it. Make sure to check out, Ryan and all his socials, website, rich with resources, as you guys can tell from this, very deep conversation. Thanks so much, Ryan, for your time, for your expertise, man. I look forward to, just everything you're contributing to the body of Christ and your passion for it, and to do it in love, most of all. I think you're a great example to a lot of us aspiring to be able to give an answer. So, man, thank you, and yeah, we will. I will personally be praying for you.
Vince, thank you. I mean, what an honor to be here on the show with you and to have this conversation. It was a blast, and thank you for being a wonderful host and the great questions you ask. And honestly, like there's no better life than one following God and living in the
Mm.
way that He has called us to live. And there's such joy and pleasure found in God and in Christ. And so I love the and just am privileged to be able to do what I do, to have people supporting the ministry, to allow me to do this is just an honor. And I love it. And so thanks for giving me the chance to come on here and share with more people. It's just such a blessing.
Yeah, well, the privilege was ours. Hopefully, we can get you on again sometime. But I'll be checking out those lives as well. So
Appreciate
yeah,
it. Thank
thank you,
you.
man. God bless you, and hopefully we'll see you again another time.
Sounds great. I'll do it.